Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, June the 1st, 2021. So for quite some time, we have been told that the just-in-time system is one of the wonders of the modern world, certainly a linchpin of a globalist distribution. And now we're getting shortages of all sorts of things, and we are being told, perhaps it's not such a wonder after all. It is certainly fragile. There's no redundancy built into this system. So when something goes wrong, what to do? Well, there's nothing that can be done. But of course, the globalists and their hubris assured us that, nothing could go wrong. Here's a story from the New York Times, how the world ran out of everything. In the story of how the modern world was constructed, Toyota stands out as the mastermind of a monumental advance in industrial efficiency. The Japanese automaker pioneered so-called just-in-time manufacturing, in which parts are delivered to factories right as they're required, minimizing the need to stockpile them. Over the last half-century, this approach has captivated global business in industries far beyond autos. From fashion to food processing to pharmaceuticals, companies have embraced just-in-time to stay nimble, allowing them to adapt to changing market demands while cutting costs. But the tumultuous events of the past year have challenged the merits of pairing inventories while reinvigorating concerns that some industries have gone too far, leaving them vulnerable to disruption. As the pandemic, notice they don't say COVID-19 anymore, just pandemic, has hampered factory operations and sown chaos in global shipping. Many economies around the world have been bedeviled by shortages of a vast range of goods, from electronics to lumber to clothing. You may have seen this joke from a couple of days ago that someone buys some old property and there's a garage that hasn't been opened for many years, perhaps decades, and the garage door is opened and whoa, there's an antique sports car in great condition. But no, actually what's valuable is the large piece of plywood, which is on the floor next to it. The Times continues, in a time of extraordinary upheaval in the global economy, just-in-time is running late. It's sort of like supply chain run amok, said Willie C. Shih, an international trade expert at Harvard Business School. In a race to get to the lowest cost, I have concentrated my risk. We are at the logical conclusion of all that. Yes, race to get to the lowest cost. Well, what else has that led to? Well, it's led to manufacturing jobs in Canada and the United States being sent to Asia. It has been led to workers in Canada and the United States being displaced by people coming in as temporary workers. The worship of lowest cost. Well, lowest cost to whom? Not to the people who buy the things, but to the people who make or distribute the things. You will have heard one of the justifications, say, for illegals working in the United States is, they save you money. Oh, I see, of the, buck that is saved on a head of lettuce, how much of that is passed on to the person who actually buys lettuce? I'm guessing 5 cents, with the other 95% going to agribusiness. Now, of course, the savings, they don't include the massive social costs which are involved with this disruption. And of course, the cost to the taxpayers with low-cost workers having all these tax advantages, as I've mentioned before. And this is well known, not as well known as it should be, that McDonald's and Walmart don't pay living wages, but McDonald's and Walmart will give you pamphlets that tell you how you can get all this extra money from Uncle Sucker. Back to the Times, the most prominent manifestation of too much reliance on just-in-time is found in the very industry that invented it. Automakers have been crippled by a shortage of computer chips vital car components produced mostly in Asia. Without enough chips on hand, auto factories from India to the United States to Brazil have been forced to halt assembly lines. Was it really such a good idea for automobiles to be so dependent on computer chips? I know that a great many drivers have been complaining in recent years that it appears that their cars have been hijacked from them. And of course, the use of computer chips in cars means that it becomes increasingly difficult, if not impossible, for people to work on their own cars. Back to the Times, the breadth and persistence of the shortages reveal the extent to which the just-in-time idea has come to dominate commercial life. This helps explain why Nike and other apparel brands struggle to stock retail outlets with their wares. It's one of the reasons construction companies are having trouble purchasing paints and sealants. It was a principal contributor to the tragic shortages of personal protective equipment early in the pandemic, which left frontline medical workers without adequate gear. Well, this is actually a national security question, PPE. There are other national security questions like rare earths. When Senator Dianne Feinstein arranged to have rare earth production shut down in the United States to the benefit of her husband, that meant that China controls something like about 93% of rare earths productions, which is obviously very much not in American interest, not economically, certainly not militarily as well. We hear so much about the tragic plight of child cobalt miners in the Congo. There's no reason why cobalt cannot be mined in Canada and the United States. Cobalt exists here, but no, it's simply cheaper to get it when it is mined by child slaves in the Congo. Just in time has amounted to no less than a revolution in the business world. By keeping inventories thin, major retailers have been able to use more of their space to display a wider array of goods. Just in time has enabled manufacturers to customize their wares, and lean production has significantly cut costs while allowing companies to pivot quickly to new products. These virtues have added value to companies, spurred innovation, and promoted trade, ensuring that just-in-time will retain its force long after the current crisis abates. The approach has also enriched shareholders by generating savings that companies have distributed in the form of dividends and share buybacks. Oh, share buybacks. Okay. Share buybacks are a trick whereby companies, well, they loot their future for the present day gain of major shareholders, members of the boards of directors, etc., etc. Still, the shortages raise questions about whether some companies have been too aggressive in harvesting savings by slashing inventory, leaving them unprepared for whatever trouble inevitably emerges. It's the investments that they don't make, says William Lazonick, an economist at the University of Massachusetts. Intel, the American chip maker, has outlined plans to spend $20 billion to erect new plants in Arizona, but that is less than the $26 billion that Intel spent on share buybacks in 2018 and 2019, money the company could have used to expand capacity, Lazonick said. Well, again, it's short-term thinking. America is utterly dependent on chips made on Taiwan, and of course, nothing bad could ever happen to Taiwan, such as a Chinese invasion. No, that could never, ever happen because we can see into the future now. In fact, history ended in, what was it, around 1999, something like that. Some experts assume that the crisis will change the way companies operate, prompting some to stockpile more inventory and forge relationships with extra suppliers as a hedge against problems. But others are dubious, assuming that, same as after past crises, the pursuit of cost savings will again trump other considerations. The shortages in the world economy stem from factors beyond lean inventories. The spread of COVID-19 has sidelined port workers and truck drivers, impeding the unloading and distribution of goods made at factories in Asia and arriving by ship to North America and Europe. The pandemic has slowed sawmill operations, causing a shortage of lumber that has stymied home building in the United States. Well, that's entirely a self-inflicted wound. The panic from COVID-19. Winter storms that shut down petrochemical plants in the Gulf of Mexico have left key products in short supply. Oh, is this new? Winter storms in the Gulf of Mexico? Andrew Romano, who runs sales at a chemical company outside Philadelphia, has grown accustomed to telling customers that they must wait on their orders. You have a confluence of forces, he said. It just ripples through the supply. Steep increases in demand made pet food scarce. Is it difficult to make pet food? And grape nut cereal all but disappear from American store shelves for a time. Just in Time was itself an adaptation to turmoil as Japan mobilized to recover from the devastation of World War II. Densely populated and lacking in natural resources, Japan sought to conserve land and limit waste. Toyota eschewed warehousing while choreographing production with suppliers to ensure that parts arrived when needed. By the 1980s, companies around the globe were emulating Toyota's production system. Management experts promoted just-in-time as a way to boost profits. Of course, we're also talking about a time when the price of oil was low and was going to stay very low forever, because, of course, that was not going to change because things never change. Companies that run successful lean programs not only save money in warehouse operations, but enjoy more flexibility, declared a 2010 McKinsey presentation for the pharmaceutical industry. It promised savings of up to 50% on warehousing if clients embraced its lean and mean approach to supply chain. Such claims have panned out. Still, one of the authors of that presentation, Knut Elicke, a McKinsey partner based in Germany, now says the corporate world exceeded prudence. We went way too far, Elicke said in an interview. The way that inventory is evaluated will change after the crisis. Many companies acted as if manufacturing and shipping were devoid of mishaps, Elicke added, while failing to account for trouble in their business plans. From 1981 to 2000, American companies reduced their inventories by an average of 2% a year. These savings helped finance another shareholder-enriching trend, the growth of share buybacks. Yes, I see. Let's just wreck the economy and leave us ever more vulnerable to any manner of shocks, but so long as big shareholders benefit, well, that more than makes up for it. What else is going on in the business world? Oh, this is from Fabiana Batista and two others at Bloomberg. 1/5 of U.S. beef capacity wiped out by JBS cyber attack. The cyber attack on JBS SA, the largest meat producer globally, forced a shutdown of some of the world's largest slaughterhouses, and there are signs that closures are spreading. JBS's 5 biggest beef plants in the United States, which altogether handle 22,500 cattle a day, halted processing following a weekend attack on the Brazilian company's computer networks, according to JBS posts on Facebook, labor unions, and employees. Those outages wiped out nearly 1/5 of America's production. Slaughter operations across Australia were also down, according to a trade group, and one of Canada's largest beef plants was idled. It's unclear exactly how many plants globally have been affected by the ransomware attacks, as Sao Paulo-based JBS has yet to release those details. The prospect of more extensive shutdowns worldwide is already upending agricultural markets and raising concerns about food security as hackers increasingly target critical infrastructure. Livestock futures slumped while pork prices rose. Yes, let's make American meat distribution dependent upon Brazil, because what could possibly go wrong? JBS suspended its North American and Australian computer systems Sunday after an organized assault on some of its servers, the company said in a Monday statement. Without commenting on plant operations, JBS said the incident may delay certain transactions with customers and suppliers. Retailers and beef processors are coming from a long weekend and need to catch up with orders. If they suddenly get a call saying the product may not deliver tomorrow or this week, it will create very significant challenges in keeping plants in operation and the retail case stocked up. The impact on meat prices at the grocery store may not be immediately apparent. Retailers don't always like hiking prices on consumers and may try to resist, according to Michael Nepveux, an economist with the American Farm Bureau Federation. How long it goes on will impact to what level consumers start to see something at the grocery stores. Well, we've already seen tremendous increases in the cost of foodstuffs, and that may have something to do with the spending spree. The government of the United States, the government of Canada, the government of Great Britain, und so weiter. The White House offered assistance to JBS. Oh, I just have to say, I'm really looking forward to see the somersaults that they're going to have to do at the Commerce Department to hide the raging inflation in the United States. Already, Benjamin Applebaum at the New York Times, inflation. Who cares about inflation? It's tremendously exaggerated. Even what happened in the 1970s, early 1980s, not a big deal. It's not like it's Weimar Germany or anything. Oh, I see. It's only when we get to Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, that we can be worried. A White House Deputy Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, told reporters Tuesday that the White House offered assistance to JBS after the company notified the Biden administration Sunday of a cyber attack from a criminal organization likely based in Russia. Attacks like this one highlight the vulnerabilities in our nation's food supply chain security, and they underscore the importance of diversifying the nation's meat processing capacity, said U.S. Senator John Thune of South Dakota. Any substantial disruption in meat processing would further stoke mounting political concerns about the concentration of the meat industry and complaints of the four giant companies that control more than 80% of U.S. beef processing unfairly leverage their power over farmers and consumers. JBS is the number one beef producer in the U.S., accounting for 23% of the nation's maximum capacity, compared to Tyson Foods at 22%. JBS closed beef processing facilities in Utah, Texas, Wisconsin, and Nebraska, and canceled shifts at plants in Iowa and Colorado on Tuesday. Pork and chicken facilities, including one in Minnesota, were also closed by the owners of Pilgrim's Pride Corp., the second biggest U.S. chicken producer, said union officials and employees. At least 5 of the 6 U.S. pork facilities were cutting back operations Tuesday, according to Facebook posts from those plants. And this is it's entirely coincidental that this is happening at a time when there is a war on meat going on, particularly a war on beef. We are told that we should all be eating grass clippings, which have been chemically messed about with, or failing that, bugs. As I say, entirely a coincidence. But why is a ransom attack stopping shipments of meat? Well, do you remember the Colonial Pipeline ransom attack? People ask the question, no, well, wait a minute. How is this shutting down a pipeline? Well, here's a story from ML Estelle at the U.S. Sun, May the 13th. Colonial Pipeline powered down its fuel distribution operations after the cyber hack because it had no way to bill customers, according to reports. The oil company, which shut down the pipeline last Friday after the ransomware attack, was said to be concerned that they wouldn't be able to figure out how much to bill customers for fuel that they received. CNN and cybersecurity journalist Kim Zetter reported that Colonial's inability to account for the fuel usage weighed heavily into their ultimate decision to pull the plug. In response to the cybersecurity attack on our system, we proactively took certain systems offline to contain the threat, which temporarily halted all pipeline operations and affected some of our IT systems, a Colonial rep said. It seems to me that these hackers might start asking for more and more and more money. because apparently these companies are not willing to operate on any kind of honor system, even temporarily. So if you can shut down billing for gas, if you can shut down billing for beef, chicken, pork, whatever, then I suppose you could shut it down forever, because already Colonial has decided that they would rather risk the economy of a large, half the United States, because they might miss billing for a while. It's a question of priorities. And this is from Abba Batarai at the Washington Post. One-way companies are concealing higher prices, smaller packages. Consumers are paying more for a growing range of household staples in ways that don't show up on receipts. Thinner rolls, lighter bags, smaller cans, as companies look to offset rising labor and material costs without scaring off customers. Well, this has been going on for an awfully long time. I mean, you may notice that when you look at something that you have bought, the unit that it is measured in seems to be strange. You know, instead of a pound, well, it will be somewhat less than a pound. Or instead of a kilo, it will be somewhat less than a kilo, etc., etc. It's a form of retail camouflage known as shrinkflation, and economists and consumer advocates who track packaging expect it to become more pronounced as inflation ratchets up, taking hold of such everyday items as paper towels, potato chips, and diapers. Consumers check the price every time they buy, but they don't check the net weight, said Edgar Dworsky, a consumer advocate and former assistant attorney general in Massachusetts, who has been tracking product sizes for more than 30 years. When the price of raw materials like coffee beans or paper pulp goes up, manufacturers are faced with a choice. Do we raise the price knowing consumers will see it and grumble about it? Or do we give them a little bit less and accomplish the same thing? Often it's easier to do the latter. Such cutbacks, economists say, typically coincide with economic downturns when shoppers tend to be more mindful of cost. There was similar product shrinkage during the 2008 recession, according to John Gorville, a marketing professor at Harvard Business School. Well, of course, another thing that can be done, and probably is done, is to delete things like juices, apple juice, orange juice, etc. Just add more water. The latest round of downsizing comes as Wall Street is on high alert for signs of sustained inflation. Oh, they have to be looking for signs. Do they? It's all around us, and it can't be gainsaid. But the wonderful science of hedonics means that for, I don't know, the last 20 years, we've all pretended, or we've all been gaslighted into pretending that, no, inflation, what are you talking about? Inflation almost doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't exist by design, because if the true level of inflation were shown, reported by the federal government, Canada, the United States, it would mean that we would learn that there has been no GDP growth at all. And since we worship GDP growth as a golden calf, this cannot be allowed to happen. One of my favorite examples of this is that anyone who's, been to post-secondary education, I don't know, in recent decades, knows that the cost of textbooks has skyrocketed. No, but according to hedonics, the cost of textbooks has not skyrocketed. Why? Because the textbooks have become more valuable. How have they become more valuable? Well, because they typically include color illustrations in them. Oh, yes, very useful, I suppose, if you're learning mathematics or economics, for that matter. Color illustrations. Oh, yes, this $130 textbook now seems like a bargain. Slimmed down product sizes are reflected in government inflation data to some extent, according to Jonathan Church, an economist with the Consumer Price Index program at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah, let's not talk about how real estate is not included in the basket of consumer goods in the United States. That medical costs are not included in that basket, that education costs are not included in that basket. In fact, hedonics is designed, it's really a self-reinforcing system such that inflation will never exist. As John Williams says, if people were used to eating steak and steak get too expensive, well, then they won't measure steak anymore. They will measure the price of hamburger. If hamburger gets too expensive, they won't measure the cost of hamburger anymore. They'll start measuring the cost of, I don't know, dog food. For Michael Jewsbury, shrinkflation arrived in the form of cat food. Without warning, late last year, his standard order for Royal Canin was filled with 5.1-ounce cans instead of the usual 5.9. But Chewy.com, his provider, continued to charge him the same $81 for his bi-weekly order. Both he and his 16-year-old cat, Maurice, immediately noticed. Hey, I'll give you an example, but I got to show it to you. Here's a package of cigarettes. These are the cigarettes that I smoke. They're called Pall Mall Extra Large Bold. But they're not extra large, are they? They are king size. And they cost about $14 a pack. Now, what happened last year, which absolutely infuriated me, and I don't know how many people noticed this, that there was a change, there was an extra sheath put around typical package of this brand. And it said that new packaging is coming. And you see where it says Pall Mall there? That's all that's left. That's all the government allows this Imperial Tobacco to show on this package. But Imperial Tobacco decided to take advantage of this duplicitously. They said, new packaging is coming. And we thought, I don't know, maybe half of the amount of this black box here will be allowed, right? What they did was, they typically sold 100 millimeter size, king size and regular at the same price. They simply eliminated the extra large size and renamed king size as extra large. So that meant that at a stroke, these cigarettes were 15 to 20% more expensive. That's typical of the kind of tricks that are played. Cigarettes in my country are pretty much a monopoly controlled by Imperial Tobacco. So if you don't like it, there's nothing you can do about it. Hello to Head McNeck, Papcasso 88, Dan, Don from Beyond. Papcasso 88 says, I love Kevin's term guilt tourist. That was in reference to Shri Pradkar, who is one of the most powerful journalists in Canada. And Shri Pradkar does not like Canada very much. Apparently her given name was Bagash Shri Pradkar. She likes to carry on about equity a lot. She has appeared in public with a cast mark on her head. May 30th tweet from her, as thousands of people across Canada rallied to support Palestinians as they were newly bombed by Israel, I look at the links that bind Black, Indigenous, and Palestinian liberation movements. Oh, okay. As I pointed out, Shri Pradkar is neither Black, Indigenous, nor Palestinian. She is a colonist from India, who was raised and graduated from university there, started in the media there, then went to Singapore, and when that didn't work out, she showed up in Canada to lecture us on how horrible we are and how horrible Canada has always been, and constantly going on about white supremacy. Of course, if anything close to white supremacy obtained in Canada, she wouldn't have a career. She wouldn't even be here. But we let these people get away with it. So I suppose it's our fault more than anything else. Hello to Dorinall, Walrus Libertarian, Jay Miller. Dornall says region lumber yards are fully stocked. It can't last forever, or can it? Hello to Tricky Who. Hello to our Finnish friend Jaakko Raipala. I bought a desk chair back in January. They told me again and again that the delivery date will be moved forward because all the logistics are screwed up because of Corona. Half a year soon. Tricky Who says lumber is up 310%. Jay Miller reports working on cars are a nightmare these days. Tricky Who says companies don't like us fixing stuff. They want a total control. Well, my favorite example of that is Apple. Typically, you can't replace a battery in it because you're violating their terms and service, and they will turn it into a brick. Why would anyone allow a company to get away with that? Replacing a battery? Well, there's a little thing that snaps in, and you snap it off, and you put a fresh battery or two in there. Or I suppose if you want it to be more secure, you could put a screw in there. But I know how to use a screwdriver, and if I don't have a screwdriver on me, the end of a steak knife or such will work, and then I can replace the battery. But no, they don't want you doing that. There's an awful lot of plastic paneling to get through, says Head McNeck. Cars or even lawnmowers, says a Tricky Who. What to eat? Suffering from diverculitis, says Tricky Who. Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you there. Jay Miller says in MBA programs, we are taught to diversify supply chains. Ed McNeck says, I think the model of diversified supply chains has shown itself to be far more delicate than the old single point of failure model. We live in a society, says Roulette Cracked. No, we don't, actually, not anymore. As James Goldsmith, the famed corporate raider, at the end of his life, he became a ferocious opponent of globalization, and he shocked Charlie Rose and some woman from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce by saying that the economy exists to serve people. People do not exist to serve the economy. I was waiting for them to start shouting heretic, or even worse, burn the witch. Klaus Schwab loves his cyber attacks, says Dan. Max Vitriol says, old engineers proverb, efficiency is the enemy of reliability. Roulette Crack says, weird how they're using the pandemic to implement their global warming agenda, an inconvenient truth. It's highly fragile and no one seems to care, says Jay Miller. Well, see, they've got it in hand. This is what we've been hearing for the last 20 years or so. It's all in hand. Nothing to worry about, people. Star Rover says products were repairable when they were all made in the U.S. Throwaway society began when U.S. manufacturers were replaced by Asia. 1950s U.S. cars are still on the road in Cuba. Yes, I've seen the pictures. I suppose this was really brought home to me with DVD or Blu-ray players, that unless you buy the most expensive models, and I bought a Samsung once, which was very expensive at the time, they all seem to be designed to fail 12 to 18 months after they are purchased. And when my very expensive at the time Samsung player stopped working, I called what must be the only electric shop left in Victoria, and I said, how much would it cost to fix this? And they said, don't bother. We'd have to send away for a part. The part would be expensive. You'd have to wait a long time. And then there's labor costs. Simply cheaper to throw it away and buy another one. It's Rhodesia. You said it right the first time. The Seek and Destroy 99. When WEF said you'll eat less meat, they meant it. Dan, well, they seem to be really moving on that quickly, aren't they? Would have been nice if Trump pursued a Trump-busting plan in his 4 years, says John S. Yes, very much so. Very much so indeed. One of the first places he could have started would be the medical industrial complex, which is full of illegal operations, between agreements between hospitals and insurance companies. How much is this operation going to cost? Well, we can't tell you. What do you mean you can't tell us? If I have laser surgery on my eyes, I know before I get it how much it's going to cost. If women get boob jobs, they know beforehand how much it's going to cost. But other kinds of operations, no, no, no. And then my favorite, they send you the bill, and lots of people said, what, are you kidding? Are you nuts? I'm not paying this. Okay, then let's negotiate. Biden's security detail has shut down half of the highways here in Tulsa for his ice cream and mass graves tour. It's a nightmare trying to get anywhere. Wasn't there 26 people killed? Something 26 black people killed in Tulsa 100 years ago? Something like that. Maybe 36. Not that many people, all things considered. The first day, the number of white people murdered by black people heavily outnumbered. Black people killed by white people. This has been really egregious with some snack foods like potato chips, says Ann Run. No taxation without representation. Can this be applied to inflation, says Adam. Metal Mike says, whoa, I just lost that there. Where did that go? Metal Mike says, my girlfriend was asking me how much a certain canned food item was, and I said $6 into my phone. The sales clerk shouted out a correction. Actually, it's $5.99. Well, you see, in Canada, that's a before tax. And in Canada, we outlawed the penny. Yes, mankind will not be crucified on a cross of copper, said Stephen Harper. So what they do is they round up or they round down units of 5 cents or less. Now, of course, it's easy enough for companies to price their product so that they are always going to be rounded up. I mean, it wouldn't take much of a computer program to do that. And, you know, keeping in mind all the different tax rates in different jurisdictions, it would be very easy. Very, very easy. William Hicks says housing, education, healthcare, up, up, up. And how about the stock market or bonds? Basically one direction up. Quite a free market, eh? Are bold Pall Malls stronger than smooth, says Metal Mike. Yes, exceedingly so. I really can't, I don't really, the other ones that aren't the bold, it's, you know, why do I want to smoke a cigarette where I'm really straining to get, you know, smoke out of it? $14 for a pack of smoke, says Palcasso 88. Yes, it is a lot of money. Of course, cigarettes are much more expensive in the United States than they used to be. When I was living in California, when in 1994, I remember getting a carton of Pall Malls, 100 millimeter, filterless, for $14. I sure miss those days. I just gave up smoking, says Dionysius. Well, be prepared to gain weight. Typically, people quit smoking, gain between 10 and 20 pounds. It costs 50 Danish kroner here in Denmark, says Doggerland DK. My 40s in malt liquor are down to 33 ounce, says David Wright. US $2.60 per pack in the Philippines. 1/8 of drugs, now 1/7, says Joker. 666. That's 1996 prices in California. LOL. Hello to Professor Pohl. David Cole doesn't believe in the lab leak theory, says Mr. Chuck McBuck the Norris. Okay. Society doesn't exist, says Margaret Thatcher. DNAC has pointed this out. Yes. Yes, Margaret Thatcher was not a conservative. She was a Manchester liberal. That's what she was. Okay, yes, 26 blacks killed in the 1921 Tulsa conflagration, says Jonathan Pohl. 39 total. The first 10 were all whites murdered on the steps of our courthouse, says Ed McNeck. It's only rounded when you pay cash, says Middle Mike. Yes, that is true. That is true. And, well, I don't know. I suppose I'm like everyone else now, that I've been paying a lot with tapping, and I'm afraid the government is going to say soon enough, well, no, we're abolishing paper money. As Sweden has done that, or apparently is going to do it real soon now. 10:36 in Montreal, says Jeffrey Pye. In West Virginia, the lowest price pack of cigarettes is a pack of Sonomas for $3.85 before tax and $4.08 afterwards. I was thinking about this West Virginia. It's a strangely shaped state, and there's a town there called Charlestown, which had a population of, let's see, 5,259 at the 2010 census. But Charlestown is at the very eastern tip of the state, and it is in fact so close to Washington, D.C., and there is a direct rail connection there that people are starting to commute from Charlestown to Metro D.C. And I'm thinking that whatever charm that exists in Charlestown is likely to disappear quickly. So, oh yes, let's talk about Canada now. Ugh. Okay. Before we get to Canada, this is a story from the Dallas Morning News. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin slammed Senator Ted Cruz on Monday for accusing the Army of projecting an image of pansies because of its inclusive recruiting policies, asserting that the Texas Republicans' rhetoric only emboldens adversaries. No, they hadn't noticed that. China, for instance, hadn't noticed that, I grew up with two mommies. They hadn't noticed special uniforms for pregnant Marines. No, because the Chinese pay very little attention to what goes on in the U.S. military. Stuff which is routinely reported, not in those defense publications that you have to pay hundreds of dollars a year for, but stuff that you get free over the internet. China and Russia would like to capitalize on talking points like that, the Pentagon chief told CNN in a Memorial Day interview, insisting the U.S. military will never be soft. Earlier in May, Cruz complained that woke policies have undermined military readiness, amplifying conservative complaints about a recruiting ad that featured a female soldier raised by two moms. Holy crap, Cruz wrote in a tweet, perhaps a woke, emasculated military is not the best idea. He escalated his attack by complaining of a woke cancer afflicting the military. We have the greatest military on earth, but damn politicians and woke media are trying to turn them into pansies, he asserted. Pansy, the Dallas Morning News reports, has long been a slur for gay and weakling, and Cruz has used it repeatedly in recent weeks. I think we're doing a great job in terms of recruiting the right kinds of people, providing access to people from every corner, every walk of life in this country, insisting that, this is Austin, insisting that diversity must be a part of who we are. So Biden, in one of his very first acts, repealed the ban on trans people in the military because they're just as fit as anyone else. Well, you see, I remember a person who is now called Chelsea Manning. You remember this person? Born Bradley Edward Manning, born 1987, according to Wikipedia, is an American activist and whistleblower. She is a former U.S. Army soldier who was convicted by court-martial in July 2013 of violations of the Espionage Act and other offenses after disclosing to WikiLeaks nearly 750,000 classified or unclassified but sensitive military and diplomatic documents. She was imprisoned from 2010 until 2017. Yes, in this person's trial, this person's defense made a great deal of gender dysphoria. So if gender dysphoria is the kind of thing that leads soldiers to hand over classified documents, then that sort of makes it troublesome. Does it not? But of course, we're not capable of connecting the dots like that anymore. This is from the Canadian Press. City crews in Charlottetown have taken down a controversial statue of Canada's first Prime Minister. A controversial statue. It was controversial. When did it become controversial? The action follows this morning, follows Monday's vote by Charlottetown Council to permanently remove the Sir John A. Macdonald statue from a downtown intersection as a response to recent revelations about Canada's residential school system. Council had been planning to improve signage and add an Indigenous figure to the Macdonald statue, but decided to remove it entirely following the discovery last week of the remains of 215 children buried on the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. Yes. What exactly do we know about this finding? Very little indeed. We have claims by Indian leaders. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this Micmac. I know how that's pronounced, or how it used to be pronounced. I'll just explain briefly what's happened in Canada. You know, Canada's Indians, of which there are something like 700 tribes, many of whom were engaged in genocidal war with each other. Slavery, particularly endemic among Indian tribes in Canada, on the West Coast, where I live. You ask the Coast Salish people what they think of the Haida, for example, and the answers that you hear will not be pleasant. But no, they all lived in peace and harmony with each other and the earth. But they don't have written languages. And a few decades ago, some scholars, white scholars, I need not point out, decided that they should have written languages. So written languages were created. I would guess that 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 Native Indians actually know these languages, but the signs, there are thousands, tens of thousands of these signs all over Canada now. And of course, they mess with the heads of white people because they see these words full of these diacritical marks, and they don't know what they mean. Now, all these Indian bands in Canada, they had official names and people knew what they were. But now we don't know what any of them are. John A. Macdonald was the first Prime Minister of Canada. He was what they call a father of Confederation. It wasn't all that long ago that the residential schools, very few people had heard of them. They were not particularly controversial. But now they are Canada's Holocaust. And the Canadian elite is so happy now, because in its endless jealousy of the United States and its so-called original sin of slavery, well, now Canada has an original sin. And if you want to know how crazy the elite has gone over this, let's just look at the homepage of the Toronto Star. Survivor of BC residential school breaking silence and calling for action. Apology issued after removal of memorial for Kamloops residential school victims. Silex journalist shares how she'll report on Kamloops Indian residential school. There's another Kamloops coming. Here are some Canadian sites believed to hold more unmarked graves of Indigenous children. Yeah. And how do we know that they had anything to do with residential schools? Rejoining the ancestors, saying goodbye to Sarah Robinson. No words, just cries. In Kamloops, calls for healing, calm, and accountability for 215 children lost. Our people need healing. We Waikai Elder on Children's Residential School grave site. North Shore Memorials honor 215 children found buried at BC Residential School. Survivors helping survivors. Residential school hotlines flooded with calls after Kamloops mass grave discovery. I'm just looking at the homepage of the Toronto Star, which is Canada's largest selling newspaper. That's just the home page. On the editorial page, Heather Malik grabbed the guilty souls who ran residential schools before they die and find out what they did. Amira Elgawabi writes, discovery of Kamloops mass grave compels our collective action. Oh, here's my favorite. Indigenous education is central to Canada's COVID-19 recovery. 7 of my grandfather's siblings lay in residential school graves. The 215 children found confirms what Indigenous people have known about Canada. And how do you know that anyone went to a residential school? Well, it's because they tell you, or their children tell you, or their grandchildren tell you, or their great-grandchildren tell you. There's an incentive because the Canadian government decided some years ago to issue large lump sum payments to anyone who'd ever been to a residential school, regardless of whether these people had suffered or whether they could prove any suffering. The residential school system was an attempt to give education and training to Indian children in Canada. They were run largely by the Catholic Church and by the Anglican Church. And of course, we now know that this is genocide. This is genocide. Look, what's this all about? What does this come down to? It's an attempt to destroy Canada, or what's left of Canada, as it has traditionally existed. That's what it comes down to. This is very dangerous, and the people who are pursuing this, and it's not just the Indians who claim that they own every square inch of Canadian territory, and the Indians in India, that is their claim, that they own every square inch, despite the treaties that they have signed. The model minorities have decided to join in. Apparently, it's all of a piece with Palestinians, and of course, Palestinians don't come from Canada, and black grievances, and of course, there were no blacks in Canada until the 1970s. But it's all of a piece, and they're all meaning to rip Canada apart and feast on the remains. Well, as I never tire of pointing out, when Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union in 1985, he had not only perestroika, but glasnost. And immediately, everyone started talking about how the Soviet Union was evil, and had always been evil since its inception. You know how long the Soviet Union lasted after that? 6 years. And it's been my prediction that Canada's not going to last another decade. I may have to shorten the number of years till it falls apart. Here's a related story from the Vancouver province. And it's not related in a way which is immediately apparent, but it is, yeah, okay. It's a story about Canada's mining industry. And it's by Pierre Gratton and Seamus O'Regan Jr. Seamus O'Regan Jr. is the gay leprechaun who is the federal minister of natural resources, and Pierre Gratton is president and CEO of the Mining Association of Canada. Canada's mining sector is also years ahead of other industries in inclusive growth and partnering with Indigenous people. It is a significant driver of economic opportunity for Indigenous communities, employing over 16,500 Indigenous people in Canada. The mining industry in Canada is screwed, as is the forestry industry, as is the oil and gas industry, because there is no longer security of title in Canada. Why? Because various courts in Canada, acting directly against what our Constitution says, have said that Native people in Canada have wide-ranging consultation rights over any such developments. What does that mean? Nobody knows. There are many cases in Canada of billion-dollar projects which have had to be abandoned. Why? Because various Indian groups are sometimes in conflict with other Indian groups, and I should keep it, you should understand that pretty much all of the Indian land claims in Canada are overlapping. That is to say that 2, 3 more Indian tribes claim the same amount of land. And if one Indian band with, I don't know, 75 people decides that it doesn't like a deal that 5 other Indian bands, with 10,000 members have come up with, that's it. It's over. Investors will not invest in places where there is no security of title. And I used to write about mining industry for a living not that long ago. And I noticed that the mining industry, Vancouver is the capital, really, of small mining companies in the world. And these people, they're abandoning British Columbia for Mexico. That's how bad the situation has come. There was the Prosperity Mine and the New Prosperity Mine. And Stephen Harper, the allegedly conservative leader of Canada, he blasted this project when it was turned down illegally by federal regulators. They have the power to stop developments if they, for environmental reasons. Then environmentalists, and let's say Indians and their allies, started talking about cultural markings and the like. Oh, the whole of the earth is sacred to us and all that nonsense. And the government, quite illegally, said, well, no, see, this project is going to cause psychological harm to Indians, so you can't do it. But no, they're just going to lie and say, oh, yes, it's full steam ahead for resource industries in Canada, when it is not. It's simply a bad bet. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who is supposedly an extreme right-winger, we find out that apparently there's going to be a cabinet change, or wholesale cabinet change, in Ontario, which is Canada's most populous province. There's a lot of opposition in his party to his continuous lockdowns, which have been some of the most stringent in the world. That's one reason why there is going to be a purge. But here is the other reason. As part of his push for new energy in cabinet, sources say, and I can imagine what these sources are, the gay PR spivs who run the Conservative Party in Ontario in the back rooms, the Premier also wants his Executive Council to be more representative of Ontario's diversity. It is too white and too male, a top official said firmly. The Conservatives hate you. If you're white, particularly if you are a white male, the Conservatives hate you. And of course, intersectionality is the war of all against all. And we are seeing that in Canada's Green Party now. This is from Christopher Reynolds of the Canadian Press. Green Party rift over Israeli-Palestinian conflict grows as MPs break from leader. It was about 15 years ago I decided to do an experiment that I had access to LexisNexis, the database, the searchable database of news stories going back to 1986. So I thought, just how much overrepresentation of news about Israel is there in the Canadian media? So I decided to search the National Post, and I discovered that there were, over that year, the previous year, there had been more stories about Israel in the National Post than there had been about Saskatchewan, which is actually a Canadian province. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has expressed a fault line in the Green Party, threatening political unity as lawmakers break from their leader and rank-and-file members clash with a party spokesman. The dust-up kicked off after Green MP Jenica Atwin directly challenged leader Annamie Paul's position on the crisis. In a Twitter post last month, she said a statement from Paul calling for de-escalation and a return to dialogue was totally inadequate. I stand with Palestine and condemn the unthinkable airstrikes in Gaza. End apartheid! ! Atwin wrote May 11th. The tweet followed one a day earlier by Green MP Paul Manley, who said that the removal of Palestinian families from the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah is ethnic cleansing. Noel Zatzman, a senior advisor to Paul, expressed solidarity with Israel in a May 14th social media post that accused many politicians, including unspecified Green MPs, of discrimination and anti-Semitism. Okay. Annemie Paul is a black woman whose family has not been in Canada very long. Her mother is from Nevis and her father from Dominica. Now, when she was running for the leadership of the Green Party last year, there was some controversy about whether she was Jewish enough, whether she was actually Jewish. She seemed to downplay this in interviews that I had seen, suggesting that she had a Jewish spirituality. She was married to a Jewish man, and according to a story in the Jewish Post and News, yes, she is fully Jewish and has been converted by a rabbi. And apparently it is all entirely kosher with her. Now, the reason I mention this is that there was a great deal of controversy about Annemie Paul's leadership campaign, not because she was barely Canadian, she's just notionally Canadian, but that a large number of Green Party members were upset that they might have a Jewish leader, and now a civil war has broke out in the Green Party because their Jewish leader has decided that their party is not, in effect, going to call for the extinction of Israel. And it couldn't happen to a nicer group of people, because I like to point out no one who works for a living has ever voted for the Green Party. The Green Party stands for, well, actually, it stands for Malthusian disaster. If the policies of the Green Party were enacted, the population of the Earth would lose several billion people. How many people would die in North America? Well, I don't know, difficult to say. And let's hear from another expert on this. This is from Deborah Brand at Breitbart. Ex-porn star Mia Khalifa tweeted a photo of herself drinking Nazi-era wine with the caption, "My wine is older than your apartheid state," sparking accusations of anti-Semitism. Her comment caused a tweet storm. Yeah. Put aside that this is Vichy wine, I love how Israel haters cast it as young. Israeli writer Han Masik wrote, "You're drinking wine made in 1943 Nazi-occupied France, while denying thousands of years of Jewish history in our ancestral homeland. Glad you found the perfect pairing for your anti-Semitism." And then, oh no, Lebanon is the real apartheid state. Now, the Lebanese do not want their country overrun by Palestinians. Yeah, that makes sense to me. But no, what is not really brought up, with the elephant in the room, is what do we care what a porn star has to say about anything? Ever. I suppose that this gives her more gravitas? Is that how we're supposed to see this? And in the category of let's drone on about food, because food, more than anything else, expresses our ethnicity, our worth, our value. This is a piece from the New York Times. Why Kim's Convenience is quietly revolutionary. In the second episode of the television show Kim's Convenience, there's a moment that has always struck with Diane Paik. Amma, the matriarch of the Kim family, arrives at the apartment of her estranged son, Jung, carrying containers of kimbap. It's not a particularly pivotal scene, but immediately brought Ms. Paik, 30, a senior social media manager for the men's grooming company Harry's, back to the many times her own parents drove 10 hours from their home in West Bloomfield, Michigan, to her apartment in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. Yikes. Always with their homemade kimchi in tow. And so this, let's get to the whining. let's get to the whining. Once again, these people could have stayed in Korea if they didn't want to have to deal with this, but here we go. For decades, Asian cuisines have been played for laughs on television. In a 1977 episode of the detective sitcom Barney Miller, Stan Wojciechowicz tells his colleague Nick Humana that his lunch of fish head soup smells like garbage. In a 1974 episode of Sanford and Son, has Fred Sanford comparing the smell of sake to sweat socks at a dinner with members of a Japanese real estate firm. Yes, and I guess we have more complaining about how my life was made a misery because people made fun of my food. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It doesn't really get any worse than that, does it? And, okay, I don't want to read that story. Let's read this story instead. Let's get Ellie Kemper. Remember her from The Office and Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt? Well, she's in serious trouble now. This is from Leah Bitsky at the New York Post. A photo showing Ellie Kemper attending a ball believed to be linked to white supremacy has resurfaced, prompting critics to accuse the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt star of racist behavior. Kemper, 41, became the subject of scrutiny on Tuesday when the image of her being named the Queen of St. Louis's Veiled Prophet Ball as a teen in 1999 started making the rounds online. The Veiled Prophet Ball is a secret fair originally formed in 1878 by elites to honor the ritual of Mardi Gras. Elites to honor the ritual of Mardi Gras because, Mardi Gras is as waspy as you can get in America. It's just, it's as white as you can get. Let's just forget about Creoles and, what that means, Yes. Each year, a person is chosen by a secret board of local elites to anonymously play the role of the veiled prophet, who would then choose a queen of love and beauty to dance with and receive a gift such as a tiara or pearls, according to The Atlantic. The veiled prophet is said to be dressed with a white Klan-style hood and robe while armed with a pistol and rifle. Have they turned up any pictures of Ellie Kemper dressed in such garb? The photo making the rounds shows that Kemper was selected to participate in the Royal Quadrille dance and named the Queen at age 19, according to The Sun. Several netizens, oh, boo-grown hiss, ripped Kemper for participating in a ritual with elitist and racist ties. Oh, yeah, go after Skull and Bones next. Yeah, let's close down Skull and Bones. Let's close down all of those, all of those clubs at Harvard and Yale and other places, where the real elite meets. It really is something that Ellie Kemper was the star of a TV show about a woman who leaves a racist cult and tries to rebrand herself or pretend it never happened. No reason why I'm bringing this up, of course. Film critic John Negroni tweeted, "Who is this creep? Seriously, who is this creep?" Well, he's got the tick. Let's see. Slate, Vulture, HuffPost, Mashable. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, and The Atlantic wrote a story about this in September 2014. Racial and class tensions are nothing new in the city, which is black run now, and also, perhaps not coincidentally, the murder capital of America. That's the story of a parade founded by white elites in 1877 to protect their position shows. I don't know much about Ellie Kemper, but growing up in St. Louis in the 1970s and 1980, I remember the Veiled Prophet Fair very well, CNN commentator Keith Boykin tweeted. I was always told it was only for white people. The racial segregation was so normalized that people were just expected to know their place. Yes. Remember the St. Louis of the 1970s when black people were invisible? Is this what Keith Boykin expects us to believe? He's a New York Times best-selling author. Oh, Dartmouth, Harvard Law, Columbia. Those sound problematically elite to me. Yeah. Okay. Apparently white people had a club. Did they at some point? That's the worst thing ever. That's absolutely the worst thing ever. Let's talk about sports. I've pretty much given up sports. I watched the end of the Indianapolis 500 on Sunday, which was kind of exciting. Helio Castroneves won his fourth Indy 500 at the age of 46, which is pretty impressive. This is from Dave James at from Agence France Presse. And Osaka crisis throws light on stars' mental health and media voyeurism. Media voyeurism. Unlike the sort of voyeurism that takes place when tennis players play in front of thousands of people on the spot, or millions of people on television. You mean that kind of voyeurism? Naomi Osaka's decision to withdraw from the French Open after revealing her battle with depression and anxiety. Yes, she's certainly been playing as if she's a victim of depression. Certainly. Has thrown the tournament into turmoil and cast a harsh light on the mental health of the sports superstars. Cast a harsh light on the mental health of the sports superstars. That is terrible writing. The 23-year-old world number 2 and 4-time major winner said she will now take a break from the sport, putting her participation at Wimbledon and even her home Olympics at risk. Osaka was fined $15,000 and threatened with disqualification from Roland Garros after she refused to honor mandatory media commitments. She claims they are detrimental to her mental health and likened the traditional post-match news conference to kicking people when they're down. Oh, just give it a rest. There's a sense of voyeurism about how it presently works, wrote Peter Terry, a professor of psychology at the University of Southern Queensland. Yes, the August Institution in Australia. Perhaps some want to see athletes crumble and break down into tears, having put them on a pedestal. Osaka is a young, introverted, anxious person. How do we know all this? She's certainly given a lot of interviews since she became famous. We should by now understand that sports stars are not superhuman, that they have the same doubts and mental health issues as everyone else. Yes, I think everyone in sports should be required to cry on camera at all times, whether they win or whether they lose or whatever happens. There's simply not enough crying in sports. Oh, okay. Now you're just going to get an outright falsehood here. Despite the fact that millions of people know what really happened, Osaka said her mental health struggles began in 2018 when she won the first of her 4 majors at the US Open in a controversial final against Serena Williams. She was just 20, stood awkwardly courtside, covering her face with her visor. Why did she do that? Because Serena Williams went nuts and then hijacked the ceremony that should have been Osaka's, but we're not going to blame Serena Williams for this because Serena Williams is the greatest athlete who has ever existed and the greatest athlete who could ever possibly exist. Oh, and who's joining this pity party here? Obviously, sports. There's a lot of tension associated with sports, and there's some people who can't handle the tension. I would think that playing, a title match is far more tension in that than, talking to a bunch of reporters who ask the same questions over and over again after the match. This is from People. Serena Williams, Martina Navratilova, and more stars show support for Naomi Osaka after French Open exit. It's been suggested to me that Nike has decided to make this woman, Naomi Osaka, edgy. Like Colin Kaepernick. And edgy people do things like this. Hey, do you think that losing the Super Bowl, or losing the World Series, or, losing any kind of championship game, particularly on the, final play or, the last 30 seconds of the game, that must be pretty crushing, huh? Well, they go into the locker rooms of these teams afterwards and they talk to them. And, they're pretty sad. Some of them are pretty upset. That's what you expect. This is what people expect to see. But we're talking about a woman here. And despite all the talk about strong women, apparently they are not. This is from Joshua Rhett Miller of the New York Post. Naomi Osaka's career in danger after French Open withdrawal, Boris Becker says. The six-time Grand Slam champion fears the constant pressure of competing at the highest levels and the regular losses and frustration that come with it could be too much to handle for someone dealing with serious psychological issues, he told Eurosport. How do we know that Naomi Osaka is dealing with serious psychological issues? Well, because her management team says so. Her dealings with medical personnel are private, as well they should be. But this was a woman who was taking the tennis world by storm, and she was dethroning Serena Williams. And, the Williams sisters not taking that very well. And apparently now she's crippled by psychological issues. She couldn't cope with the pressures of facing the media. Yes, a half Japanese, half Haitian woman the media has been drooling over for the past 2 years. Yes. Oh, the hostile media. Well, they're not going to be hostile with her, and they're not going to be hostile with the Serena Williams. When Serena Williams acted abominably at the U.S. Open, the first major that Osaka won, it was considered blasphemy to mention what she had done, to suggest how outrageous it was, such as the veneration in which she is held by the media. Okay. All right. You want to know how to stop anything in America now? Get a hold of some cord. Just get a hold of some cord. And with this one weird trick, you can stop anything in America. This is from justthenews.com. U.S. flag on crane mistaken for noose sparks Memorial Day outrage on college campus. Local NAACP offended by steel cable loop holding an American flag on a construction crane. A possible noose reported to Central Connecticut State University turned out to be a common sight across America, an American flag hanging from a construction crane. That didn't stop the university or the local chapter of the NAACP from taking offense at the display. A construction crew working on campus hung an American flag from the crane's cable to recognize Memorial Day. President Zolma Toro wrote to the campus community. It was the second steel cable loop recently mistaken for a noose in the area. Back in the days of lynching, and of course it wasn't all black people who were lynched, was steel typically used to lynch people? Quite frankly, I think it is reckless and tone-deaf behavior, Toro wrote. We have been in contact with the construction company and demanded that the cable be lowered tonight. We have a team on site tonight monitoring the situation. John Tully, interim vice president for student affairs, told Fox that the university spoke to some people who certainly felt some pain at seeing the noose-like appearance, and we feel that pain as well. Ronald Davis, president of the New Britain NAACP, told the station, regardless of what someone else says about that, what I see as a black man, that's a noose, period. Take it down. There's a lot of such nooses at construction sites because they're useful for holding things in place, you know. We laughed a couple of years ago when Sarah Silverman, who of course informed us that Donald Trump was, quote, worse than Hitler, unquote, she started screaming about seeing swastikas on the streets of New York City, and they were construction markings. Yes, because she sees construction markings and, well, they must be swastikas because, you know, swastikas are all over the place in New York City. And Joe Scarborough, who was formerly a Republican congressman, had a rant on his show today telling Trump supporters to leave America and that they should be replaced by immigrants. Yes. Yes, a member of Conservatism Inc. wants Americans replaced by foreigners. There's a shocker. Also, they will fight for America. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's have a American army made up of people who are paid, foreigners who are paid to do so. That didn't work out too well for the British with their German mercenaries in the Revolutionary War, as I recall. In fact, Machiavelli wrote about this at some length, that mercenaries, as a rule, are not a good idea. But to people like Joe Scarborough, well, mercenaries are, being a mercenary is the highest form of patriotism. You know, being from the United States, knowing its traditions, its customs, having a history, that is worthless. In fact, those people probably support Donald Trump and should be tossed out. Yeah, once again, remember the new era of civility that we were going to get with President Biden? Remember that? We're not hearing too much about this civility anymore. GC Style says now we can't tie knots without offending the fragile. Yes. Yes. Well, what about, it used to be people used to tie, knots around their fingers to remember things. Well, that's kind of noose as well, isn't it? Aslan says, what have Zionists done for you all? I think you know my position on this. Look, if I'm going to be forced to choose between Israel and the Palestinians, I'm going to choose Israel. Okay. And the supporters of Palestine, Muslims or not, attacking Jews in the streets, this doesn't sit well with me. I don't see that these people have much to offer my country except for furious, often deranged anger. Okay, let's look at the chat here. Aslan says trouble started in Algeria when France. Okay, all right. I'm not going to repeat that. Okay, I thought it was. Okay, Don Willis says, for sure that's a true sign of a con. However, I try to gain something from many different sources, picking and choosing. Blue Velvet says Israel recognizes same-sex marriages conducted elsewhere. What is KMG drinking? It's simply tea. It's simply, Indian tea or tea from Ceylon. No sugar, no milk. That's typically what I drink. I grew up in a household. Well, my mother was from Britain. And the tea was too dark. It was overbrewed. It was noxious. It was like vegetable soup. And there was a ton of sugar put in it. And typically milk, often condensed milk, or even sometimes clotted cream, so that it became a meal. And I don't know, I guess when I was in my early 20s, I just decided that this is empty calories. If my cups of tea are going to be a meal, well, this obviously means that I'm going to have to cut out an actual meal. I drink a lot of tea in the day. I mean, I used to drink like 20 cups. I don't know. This is 20-ounce cup I'm drinking out of now. So that'd be like about 2.5 cups. If a cup is 8 ounces. I don't know. I probably drink about 10 to 12 cups of tea a day, but no, it's just Russian style. And I don't mind it cold at all, actually. It's when it gets hot, and it's starting to get hot here in the Orient, they have long imbibed hot tea. when it is very hot, which sounds counterintuitive, but it isn't, because it makes you sweat, and sweat cools you down. Okay. Women's sports, who cares, says Palcasso 88. Well, I suppose tennis is one of the few sports, the only sport really, that has a fan base, women's sport that has a fan base outside of lesbians. It really is. I'll tell you a story about Taki, the Greek columnist, one of the founders of the American Conservative. I interviewed him years ago, and he was watching Wimbledon, and he volunteered to me. I didn't ask him this. He said, "I'm cheering for Pam Shriver," and then he said, "because she's the only one who isn't a dyke." Oscar Toe says, "Sports stars are becoming like authors. Their work is a side note. It's all about their neuroses." Yes, I've mentioned this with regard to the entertainment industry, musicians, that their fame is largely intrinsic to anything supposedly artistic that they may do. I mean, when was the last time that Britney Spears did anything that was taken seriously? It's a long time now. But Britney Spears is going to be famous forever. And there's this long-running battle about the fact that, which I find rather shocking, that her father is her conservator or co-conservator, also while being her manager. So if poor Britney has to get worked to death in Las Vegas, is this good for her mental health? Well, it's certainly good for her father's bank account. Ed McNeck says, "I've trolled Kev for being an Irish Catholic Canuck living north of Washington State, while also being a strong adherent to a militant foreign ideology based on a religion which isn't his, but he's set." I'm not. I don't think that it's fair to say that I'm a strong adherent to a militant foreign ideology based on a religion which isn't his. Okay? The Israelis have fought for their country several times, and the occupied territories are the result of the other powers in the region deciding to declare war on Israel, and they got shellacked, and they lost East Jerusalem, and they lost the West Bank. Spoils of war, live with it. The Israelis are never going to give it back, and if you want my opinion, Israel should have annexed the West Bank in 1967 and expelled its inhabitants, paying them fair market price for their property, of course. But no, why should they leave? Why should they? This wasn't a problem in my country, until we very foolishly started importing large numbers of Muslims who were determined to fight a war in Canada over the Middle East, in the same way that we have foolishly imported large numbers of Sikhs who were determined to fight a war in Canada over the Punjab. I felt the same way about Ernst Zundel, a typical immigrant to Canada, a typical ungrateful immigrant who brought his parochial quarrels to my formerly peaceful country. This man emigrated to Canada in 1959, and shortly thereafter, he starts moaning about how he had trouble in Canada being a German, people mocking his accent, ethnicity, and the like. Well, if he really felt so strongly about that, he could have stayed in a country which was, at the time, in 1959, almost entirely German. That is to say, Germany. Don't come to a foreign country and complain that it's full of foreigners. But of course, that sort of behavior is rewarded in Canada, as the story of Shri Paradkar demonstrates. Okay, black fragility, just so. So does KMG support the UK vis-a-vis Ireland? Indeed, I do. It was largely the United States that forced Britain to surrender to the killers of the IRA. No question about it. And a foolish group of people of Irish descent, particularly in the northeast of the United States, raising money for NORAID, which was a front for the IRA. Every St. Patrick's Day, the President of the United States, Democrat or Republican, would invite some IRA killer like Martin McGuinness to the White House, and it absolutely turned my stomach. Okay, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the new Peter Principle. This article from alexdanko.com from January this year was just sent to me over the last day. It's called The Michael Scott Theory of Social Class. I'm happy to finally share a thesis I've been chewing on for a little while. I call it the Michael Scott Theory of Social Class, which states, the higher you ascend the ladder of the educated gentry class, the more you become Michael Scott. We should start with one background assumption, which is I'm going to assume you've watched The Office, American version, or at least have a passing knowledge of the main characters. If not, then this idea will probably not land as hard. But so 12 years ago, Venkatesh Rao wrote a lengthy and fascinating series of essays called the Gervais Principle, which walked through the NBC show The Office, an American adaptation of Ricky Gervais's original British series. The essays go after a particular aspect of organizational behavior around how organizations that survive tend to self-stratify into three predictable layers. In the bottom layer, you have about 80% of the office who occupy the rank and file roles. These are the losers. Rao carefully notes that losers does not mean uncool or unworthy, specifically means economic losers. Losers are the people who are set in roles or stations in life where the output of their effort is wholly realized by someone else. As they learn throughout their careers, their skill or engagement might lead to incremental career progress, but no real leverage of any kind. Hence, they are economic losers, and they know it. They see the world through clear eyes and cope. I just mentioned something about The Office that, when it began, to some extent, it was a semi-realistic look at the rather hopeless situation of people in dead-end jobs at a time of economic downturn. But it changed. Michael Scott, if you watch the first but short season of the show, he was simply all nastiness, much more like the Ricky Gervais character in the original. But then they had to make him lovable. You had a sense at the beginning that these people were worried for their jobs. There's a well-known episode, the first season, where Michael Scott has to fire someone, and he dithers, and he's going to fire Creed, and then Creed says, no, don't fire me, fire this other guy, he's useless. And so the other guy gets fired, and he stomps out in a rage, declaring that he hates, half of the office. Later on, there was little pretense that these people were working at all. Creed didn't work. He made a huge mistake and got someone else fired for it, someone who was not responsible. Let's see, Pam's job was completely superfluous. And then later she invented the title of office manager for herself, which was fraud, actually. Pretty close to theft. We had Toby in HR. This is a company with 10, 11 employees, and they need a full-time HR representative. I mean, the longer the show went on, the more it drifted from reality. And I'll just say, with regard to, I'm trying to think of the employee, Stanley. For the longest time, I had no idea that Stanley was a salesman because we never saw him selling anything. We rarely saw him on the phone. He just did his crossword puzzles all the time and seemed to be very put out when anyone was trying to get his attention. And so, as I say, any kind of exploration of realistic or semi-realistic examination of real workplace dynamic disappeared. Anyway, back to this essay. Three classic examples in the show spanning the broad range of losers are Stanley in sales, Pam the receptionist, and Daryl in the warehouse. Stanley is a grumpy loser. He treats the entire workday as a run-out-the-clock situation. Pam is a cheerful loser. She generally tries to make the best of things, although fully aware of her reality. Daryl is a smart loser. He's wise to how the world works and successfully rules over his little kingdom of the warehouse, but generally understands he's staying where he is. Yes, staying where he is. That's one of the problems with sitcoms, is you get characters who have fan bases, and so they have to stay where there is. I was disappointed with the character of Daryl on the show because it seemed to me that he was the only character who was actually experiencing some kind of personal growth. He was the only character who was getting smarter, and then they decided to really knock him down a peg. Yes, I'm an idiot, and I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. As far as Stanley goes, Michael Scott, they brought in lawyers in this show several times. The whole office, the company, would have been waylaid by sexual harassment lawsuits, by racial harassment lawsuits. The way that Michael Scott carried on in the workplace, I'm pretty tolerant for this sort of thing. But Michael Scott constantly berating Kelly, you're an Indian, I'm going to make fun of you for being an Indian, or I'm going to, let's talk about being Indian, I'm going to dress in Indian clothing. And Stanley, you're black, aren't you? Black. And of course, he did the same thing with Daryl. And the constant sexual innuendo. And, as I say, Stanley, it's all about the bonus for me, said Stanley. Stanley would have walked away from that company, from the Scranton branch of Dunder Mifflin, with a multi-million-dollar settlement in real life. Meanwhile, at the top, you have corporate. These are the sociopaths, the economic winners. They are smart. They care about getting power and little else. The sociopath characters in the office include David Wallace, the CFO, Jan, before her series of breakdowns, Ryan the temp, who brilliantly grabs real power only to immediately squander it, and finally, the one character who never quite goes over to the dark side, but certainly thinks about it, the real will he or won't he drama of the show, Jim. The losers and the sociopaths are actually pretty alike. They are alike in that they both see the world through clear eyes as it actually is. The losers basically understand how the world works and how their role fits within it. So do the sociopaths. But in the middle, in between the losers and the sociopaths, is a very different group. That group is the middle managers, the clueless. In the office, this group is an iconic trio in ascending order of cluelessness: Andy, Dwight, and of course, Michael. Dwight was never a manager. That was one of the biggest jokes in the show, assistant to the regional manager. He was not even assistant regional manager. Dwight was a salesman, and as we learned, easily the best salesman in the office. He seemed to be well off, even as the show started, and he got progressively richer. At one point, he actually bought the building that Dunder Mifflin and several other companies operated in. So I don't think that it's quite right to call him a middle manager. But in any event, when it really comes down to it, The Office is a show about these three people, because the real subject of The Office, explored brilliantly over many seasons, is this three-layer structure. At the top, at the bottom, you have rational realists, but what's actually interesting is the clueless in the middle and how they interact with everyone below and above them. Michael's job both shapes and selects for a particular kind of detachment from reality. Middle management is a fascinating construct. Your employees have literal jobs and responsibilities, and your bosses have literal jobs and responsibilities. But Michael spends his entire day in a construct of his own creation. Everything about his job is subjective and arbitrary. These are people who, in effect, have slipped into a job, a worldview, and self-image that is friendly but deeply alienating. It's funny about Michael that Michael was such a disastrous manager that if his position were eliminated entirely and everyone was left to their own devices and they could simply, hand the results of their sales to the accounting department or the like, everyone would be better off, much, much better off. Once The Office gets really established by season 3, the central drama of the show takes form, which is the struggle of the clueless between Michael, Dwight, and Andy. Every other character in the show, except Toby in HR, whose explicit isolation from the rest of the group in both the org chart and the office floor plan is flawlessly executed, is at peace with reality to some degree, but not these three. They are tormented by their detachment from reality, but at the same time, they compete with one another to double down on that detachment. Yes. The first, it talks about language, speech patterns here. I mentioned this about Michael Scott. Middle managers, what good are they? Obviously, there's a very serious problem with management. I've talked about this before. If you talk about the stupendous pay given to CEOs, oh, you're being paid 500 times what the person on the shop floor earns. Okay, are you 500 times more valuable? Oh, no, the number of people who could do this job. Oh, really? This is obviously untrue. I mean, the number of, you could look at HP, you could look at IBM, you could look at Wall Street firms. There was one firm on Wall Street, one of the most famous, that paid their first black CEO over $150 million to go away. Over $150 million to go away. This suggests that anyone pulled in off the street could have done a better job than this person. How is it possible to measure the usefulness of a CEO or any other kind of manager? Because managers will, always claim that, oh, if my department is doing well, that's all me. It's all down to me. Now, if my department is doing poorly, it's those clowns who are working for me, Posture talk, the first major speech pattern. Posture talk is everything said by Michael, Dwight, and Andy to anyone, the staff, the execs, or each other. Everything they say is some form or another of meaningless, performative babbling. This is the language of living inside a construct where your entire world lives within arbitrarily drawn boxes and you have nothing concrete to attach to. It's the only language that Michael knows how to speak. When people speak back to Michael, Dwight, and Andy, they use a different language, baby talk. Baby talk is the language spoken from the literal to the clueless. It's placating, soothing, or often misdirection. There, you have no idea what you're saying. Why don't I distract you with something over here? The three other languages spoken which don't involve the clueless are power talk, the sociopath's internal language, which is entirely about competitive information gathering and retroactive deniability. Game talk, the loser's internal language, recurring games or coded rituals to get through the day. And the rare instance where corporate actually speaks directly with the loser's straight talk. It's the one and only time where people actually speak directly with zero encoding. Once you get familiar with this three-tiered realist, clueless, realist structure, you start to see it in other places. One of the biggest stages on which you could argue it plays out pretty faithfully is social class structure in America. Several years ago, Michael Church wrote a neat summary of the American social class system and how the traditional metaphor of climbing the ladder of social class is wrong in an important way. There isn't one single ladder, there are three, each with different values, norms, and goals. You have the first and largest ladder, labor. Next, you have the educated gentry ladder that corresponds to what we typically call the upper middle class. And finally, you have the elite ladder. And the remarkable thing about these ladders is how perfectly they correspond to the three-tiered pyramid in the office of the losers, clueless, and sociopaths. So the elites are sociopaths, barbarians, old money, the working rich, executives, transitional elite, junior iBankers, aspiring founders, the educated gentry. And we see from lowest to highest detachment from reality, traditional gentry, transitional gentry, community or first generation college, upper middle class, university educated professionals, elite creatives, PhDs, blue check marks, and at the top level of cluelessness, cultural leadership, New York Times op-ed level. Labor, economic losers, from lowest to highest, tough jobs, hourly service, blue collar, stable but lean, high skill labor, barriers to entry, and labor leadership owners. Climbing the labor ladder means making more money. At the bottom are really tough jobs, typically paid hourly, informally, or with tips. Above that, there are the stable but modest blue collar jobs, then high skilled or good union protected careers. Finally, at the top, you find labor leadership, which doesn't mean being a union boss, but means you've made it. You own stuff. You drive a new F-150. You have income properties. You enjoy nice things. If you've made it to labor leadership, you are by no means hurting for money, but you have not actually escaped the category of economic losers because the labor ladder does not create paths to leverage. That is the fundamental difference between how the labor ladder works versus how the elite ladder works. The people on the labor ladder fully understand this. They see the world as it is with clear eyes, like Stanley, Pam, or Daryl, or the one person who actually makes the jump, Ryan, in The Office. At the bottom, there's also a transitional layer. It's how you get onto this ladder. If you weren't born there, often via community or first-generation college. Oh yes, this is quite good. On the way up the ladder, you earn social status by doing things that detach you from normie reality. David Brooks wrote a fabulous book on this phenomenon called Bobos in Paradise, about the peaceful merger between the bourgeois and bohemian classes that created this strange but durable social tier. These are people who would be mortified to show off a $10,000 watch, but excitedly tell you about their $100,000 kitchen remodel filled with 100-mile diet cookbooks and single-origin Japanese knives, or their 6-month work sabbatical they spent powerlifting. This is a group of people where a Subaru is a higher status car than a Cadillac, but the highest status car is none, or now, a Tesla. And oh yes, some examples of posture talk, the educated gentry talking to anyone, but mostly to each other, includes farmers market banter, praise me for how sustainable I am, academia banter, validate my obscure pursuits, and blue check, mark Twitter, enshrine my takes. Examples of baby talk, speaking to the educated gentry, include Uber driver banter. I'm willing to entertain this conversation, but please give me a 5-star rating. I really need it. Whole Foods marketing material. You are so wise for shopping here. And Prestige TV. You are so smart for watching The Good Place. The great irony of the educated gentry is the more time you spend in it and the more people talk to you with that language, the more you turn into Michael Scott. It's a funny juxtaposition because Michael Scott in the show is absolutely not in this economic class. He never went to college. His job falls solidly in the labor ladder. But his character is a bang-on portrayal of what it's like to aspire to petit bourgeois values, and this was quite good. Not to start a fight over a choice made in December 2006, this was written in 2019, but Michael Scott absolutely does know how and would be proud of it. What? Well, back in 2006, I normally refrain from nitpicking works of fiction too heavily, but there is no way Michael Scott would know how to use chopsticks. He had to teach himself by watching movies alone in his apartment over the course of 10 years, and he would brag about this because it makes him interesting. I find this very interesting indeed. I don't go to Chinese restaurants, but I've been to Japanese restaurants, and they give you chopsticks, and I always ask for a knife and a fork. Now, this often gets me looks, dirty looks, disapproving looks, or patronizing looks. Oh, I see. You haven't mastered the intricacies of the chopsticks. No, why would I want to? They're manifestly inferior to a knife and fork. I'm just interested in the food. This is in no way a quasi spiritual or cultural experience for me. I just want to be able to eat the food without spilling it all over the table or into my lap. And a knife and a fork are far superior to chopsticks. Chopsticks are a perfect example of this. Oh, so you taught yourself how to use chopsticks. Oh, and you do the proper ritual. When you break them apart, you warm them up by rubbing them against each other as if you're trying to start a fire. So you've mastered chopsticks. And so do you sleep better at night knowing that you have mastered chopsticks? I think that, it's one of the first, not the first time I saw anyone eating chopsticks, and this is fictional too. But in the Woody Allen movie, Play It Again, Sam, which came out, around 1970, 71, such like that, we see Woody Allen demonstrating the proper use of chopsticks, and he is shoving rice into his mouth, and it is absolutely disgusting. But again, here is Woody Allen, who's a character who has mastered the use of chopsticks, when, of course, probably, when you were 4 or 5 years old, with the help of your parents, you mastered the use of a knife and a fork. But I have to be careful here, because I have noticed with young people, including members of my own family, and this is shameful, but it's true, a great many young people literally do not know how to use a knife and a fork. They can't do it. They can't do it. One, because, I don't know, their parents didn't force them to do it. And two, they have grown up eating food which can be drunk out of a bowl or eaten with one's hands. And I don't know, using a knife and well, if you have to leave a whole bunch of food on a bone or whatever, well, it's just too much trouble. It is just too much trouble. Try eating peas with chopsticks. Didn't think so, says Don Willis. When I was a bit more foolish, I made a few red pill statements at these public microphones they had around the city, said Ogan's Iron. I always ask for 2 sporks, says Roulette Cracked. Jonathan Paul says, in Africa, you eat with your hand. Okay. What are we talking about? Bar stories here now? Okay. What else do we have? A couple of ACLU fundraisers approached me today, dropped a few red pills. They looked scared and said, okay, thank you, sheepishly, and walked off. Ogan's Iron says, James Lindsay thinks land acknowledgements are dangerous, and sooner or later some high court will take it seriously. This land is stolen, will soon be taken seriously, expropriation to follow. Well, yes. Whenever I went to ceremonies, educational ceremonies associated with my children, first words, we acknowledge that we are on the land of, oh, do you? So this land, this structure, these buildings, they don't belong to the school district. They don't belong to the province of British Columbia. They belong to some Indian tribe. If you really believe that, why don't you clear off? Or failing that, start paying tribute to them. It's like, when I talk about love is love, this is a universal statement. If you start saying that, oh, we're on stolen land, we're colonists, well, we were colonists, okay? We, that is to say, people like me, British people, French people, we made Canada. What exists Canada and what is looking to be stolen from us, the people who were here when we showed up have absolutely nothing to do with it. Nothing whatsoever. And at the time the British and French showed up, and for quite some time afterwards, these peaceful people at one with each other and the land were engaged in endless genocidal wars. Hey, why don't we ask the Huron about what they think about this peaceful, gentle people myth? No, we can't, because they were genocided out of existence by the rest of the Confederacy. Okay. Do we got anything else here? The rubbing of chopsticks is to remove splinters, says Buddy. Okay, well, I'm sure that serves a purpose. No, I felt a little ashamed going into a Japanese restaurant, notwithstanding the fact that on the West Coast, Japanese restaurants are almost exclusively run by Chinese or Koreans, and ordering a knife and a fork, and I just thought, screw it. Who am I impressing by using chopsticks? I suppose, if I'd grown up from the time that I was a year old or whatever using chopsticks, well, that would be natural to me, but I didn't grow up using chopsticks. So I think I'm going to wrap this up right now on Theater Thursday, talking about a movie from 1948 directed by Carol Reed and starring Ralph Richardson called The Fallen Idol. I rewatched it again last night. It is a truly beautiful and moving film about childhood, about the loss of innocence. And again, there's not very many films made about childhood from the child's point of view. I'll just tell you briefly that when I think back to my childhood, one of the things I remember was how short I was and how I saw the world. There was a lot of looking up at people. I have a memory, I guess it was about, let's see, when I was 6 years old, when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I just moved to Vancouver, and they used to have these things called road shows. These were the long movies with intermissions, and you paid more for them, and they would play for months and months and months. And we went to one at the old Capitol Theater, one of the old vaudeville movie palaces in Vancouver, which was turned into a dreary multiplex decades ago. And I think it was called The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. I think it was called that. So I remember I went with my parents, and in the lobby, in intermission, I got separated from my parents, and I absolutely panicked because I was lost in a forest full of giants. And well, what was I going to do? I suppose I could run around blindly, run between these two people or these two people. But, I remember that. And I think, yes, when one was a boy, one was preoccupied by the subject of height, one's own height, and the height of other people. On the book club, I'm going to be talking about a novel by an American-Polish actress who currently appears in HBO's Succession, Dagmara Dominczyk. It's called The Lullaby of Polish Girls. And on Music Monday, next Monday, I'm going to be talking about a genuine British eccentric called Bill Drummond, who is associated with the band KLF, and the story of his £1 million and its journey and its end. One of the most truly remarkable stories, certainly in rock music history or just history, full stop. So I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in today. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button. And subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you like the show, I would very much appreciate donations to it. You can donate to me via PayPal, donate to the show via PayPal at Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction, that in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.